Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Thank you all for tuning in. In Charlottesville, white students are about 4 times as likely to be in the gifted program, while black students are more than 4 times as likely to have been drop out, be suspended, or some other level of disciplinary action, including being held back a grade. This is the basis for our conversation today. It might sound like a dreary one, but Lance and I have a unique ability to put a positive spin on it. We'll have to establish what's going on here exactly, and then we'll get into what we can do about it, because that's what we're about here on The State of Us. Of course, why do you care? Well, we have someone here who's uniquely qualified to answer that question, and we can't begin the conversation without him.
Your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, how are we doing, folks? I think you can care on a couple different levels. One, the landmark Supreme Court decision of Brown versus the Board of Education was 65 years ago and was supposed to take care of some of these problems. Secondly, if you are looking for our society to become more integrated and to become more diverse, and you want to solve some of the problems of the entitlement programs, then you need to start with young people, and you need to get them the education that they need in order to be able to hold down a job and become a tax-paying citizen instead of someone who is going to be a drag on society. And that's what I used to always joke with my students about. So one of these days I'm going to get old. Well, now I'm closing in on that. And I said, you all are going to have to work to pay taxes so that you can pay taxes to take care of me. And they would laugh, but I really meant that. That was a way to say, if you all decide to drop out, or you don't take jobs, or you are a drain on the system either because you go to prison or have kids out, that you can't take care of. And all of a sudden you then are spending tax dollars that could go to me as an old person.
That's right.
All right. So
could take care of me.
It still seems like, though, that at least in this southern city in Virginia, a bastion of Civil War history. And also, if you remember, just a little over a year ago, the death of a young lady during the white racist meeting with people who were espousing diversity. I'm not trying to put judgments on either side that they clashed and a young lady lost her life, that this is the same town where this took place. So it's an interesting look at how the public schools
are operating. Separated and far from equal in Charlottesville, racial divide. And that's from the front page of the New York Times on Wednesday. So you're welcome to look it up online. If you Google that, of course, you'll find it.
Very interesting article. We're going to get about 2 or 3 high points out of it. There are probably about 12 good points or situations that are in the article.
And as in keeping with the New York Times format, there is data, but there's also a lot of personal story information in there. We're not going to touch on hardly any of that, so I definitely recommend that you look it up. But that quote, or that stat that I'd brought up there in the opening, I just wanted to correct the back part of it. Black students are more than 4 times as likely to be held back a grade and almost 5 times as likely to be suspended from school, according to a ProPublica examination of newly available district and federal data.
Than white students.
Right.
That's the comparison to white students in the public school system.
Yes. So obviously there's something going on. And I think one of the things that comes to mind then is, you've got this socioeconomic issue, which isn't to say that that's not, relevant, obviously, but it's also to point out that it's not the only thing happening.
Well, and too many times I think we've used that in the past to make ourselves feel good.
Right. We can just blame it on that.
These are the poor kids. So, we know that they have lots to overcome and things are tough. And that's kind of a cop-out answer.
Yeah.
It is a legitimate reason. I've seen it happen, but it's also, hey, that doesn't solve the problem. We don't want to continue that cycle. We'd like to break that cycle of poverty or lower socioeconomic status being, or a higher. The flip side of that is, well, if you come from a higher socioeconomic status, then you're already inherently going to be successful.
And the big thing here in Charlottesville comes down to this whole gifted program and how students perform better once they're in it, and that it's predominantly white when there are black students who are asking to be in the program.
And I would also add the 2-tier diploma system that the state of Virginia has created, because the idea being if you get the advanced diploma, you're more likely to get in college. And as the article points out, that's not necessarily true for African American students.
Right.
So there's some real issues here. And again,
on a few levels.
Right. And to mention, just most of you probably know, but Charlottesville, the home of the University of Virginia, established by our third president, Thomas Jefferson. So this is an area where education is very important. Not that it's not important anywhere in America, but this is one of the oldest regions of education in our country's history.
One last thing on why we care. I know we got just a little bit away from that, but what I wrote down for me was, and I always kind of like to pull back a little bit, but I think we're in this time where there's a lot of division in America and a lot of, us versus them. And this is one of those areas that certainly doesn't help. It's a indicator that we've got bigger problems than simply our political beliefs going on. We've got serious social problems that we still have to address, that, as you pointed out, have in many ways, there was a big, fight for 30, 40 years ago. And now we're still dealing with that. And even 40 years ago, we were still dealing with the fallout of stuff that we had worked on 100+ years ago. So it's been a really long process, and it isn't done. Of course it's better. But it isn't just that socioeconomic thing. And I think if we care about that we have a divided country that seems to have issues, sitting down with people who you don't agree with to talk to them, that this is a place where it's even bigger than that issue. So if you care about that, you should by default care about something that's even more severe. And this is also something that further sows that on both sides. One, if you're exposed to less diversity, and I don't mean that just in the racial sense. I don't mean it just that way. I just mean diversity and diversity of opinions, diversity of backgrounds, which, because of the way our country was founded, oftentimes fall along racial lines. Not always, but frequently do. And so that's where you run into the less diversity you're exposed to, the less likely you're going to be willing to hear somebody out. And then you can't even be expected to come to a solution if you don't even listen to what they have to say in the first place, because you're just going to write it off before you even. And I see a lot of that happening today on both the liberal conservative sides.
They both just talk about the mob mentality.
Right.
Of each side instead of, wait a minute, that's just like, okay, well, I can't talk to you. If we're going to solve the problems, we have to talk.
Right. We have to, because obviously the not talking right now isn't getting us a lot. So we got to try something different. So I want to focus on, Lance, answering a few different questions for our audience today. Starting with is this racism? And I know you and I talked about this question before we went on air, before we recorded today. Could you sum up again what you said when I said that would be one of the questions?
Oh, I said it's tough for me to talk about racism because the definition, and it's not that there's not a definition, but I think it means so many different things to so many different people that it's hard to discuss. People throw up barriers automatically if you say something is racist, or, someone is racist, or in this case, the rules or how information is handed out or how students are dealt with are racist. It automatically puts up strong feelings on both sides that get in the way of talking and finding a solution. But I think as you read this article, it's very apparent that students that come from the Black community within Charlottesville are not treated the same as white students. And they're not given the same information. They're not given the same encouragement. They're not given the same challenges. All of those things that we should be doing for any child in our education system.
State exam data shows that among Charlottesville children from low-income families, white students outperformed Black students in all subjects over the past 3 years.
So it doesn't matter the poor kids in Charlotte. The white poor kids are doing better than the minority poor kids. I mean, folks, that's not right. You can't then say, well, see, it's just socioeconomic.
Right. Because it's not.
Because it isn't. There's even deviations within the same socioeconomic group. And that says that there's a problem here that we need to fix, whether it's blatant, whether it's just something that's happening that nobody realizes. You know, it doesn't have to be that somebody's out to get somebody else. It's just like, folks, there's a problem here. And that's where, as you pointed out, we need to learn to talk to one another. Because I'm not saying you're doing this on purpose. I'm not saying that the educational leaders in Charlottesville are mean, horrible people. But it's like, we obviously have a problem here. We have a systemic problem with the public school system in Charlottesville. And let's try to fix it. Nobody's calling you names, and I don't want to put anybody in a category, which is why I don't like to use the word racism. I'm just like, we have a problem here, and let's solve it. And I don't need to call you names
to solve it,
to be able to solve the problem. I don't need to make you feel badly about yourself or your heritage or your belief system or any of that. Let's just say we have two students here. One seems to be doing a whole lot better than the other, even though their life is pretty equal when it comes to where they live, the struggles they face. Why is that going on? And how do we fix that?
And that's the Gwyn McGee, he's an associate professor at the University of Virginia, says there's been a lot more openness to some of those challenging conversations since a lot of the racial inequality stuff surfaced last year with the rally that you're talking about. He said, quote, "For a lot of people, it's really uncomfortable to see that even if you haven't personally done anything wrong, you're part of a larger structure that contributes to producing poverty and inequality, including in educational outcomes," end quote. And that to me was, and again, just a difference in how Lance and I saw this question. I mean, I agree with Lance's point. It's just a totally different angle. I think it's difficult to say if it's racism because while there is that dictionary definition, there are a lot of different angles. And part of what comes to my mind is, is it racism? Is there discrimination based on race? Are people of one race being treated differently because of their race than others? And the because of their race thing leads me to this point of intentional versus unintentional. It doesn't make it any less bad necessarily that it's unintentional, but I do think that it's important for us we approach the problem differently. And I think his quote here, Mr. McKee, pointed something good out. It's really difficult and uncomfortable because they don't feel like, well, it's not my fault that it is this way. You're right. It might not be, but it is. But it
is. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Sorry, I didn't know that I was stealing your thunder there, but it is your fault. I mean, if I was,
you may not have been the initial person, but by just allowing it to continue, you are in effect, just as bad as the people who started.
If I were in the Charlottesville School District as a teacher or an administrator, I would take it upon myself to try to change this because I am part of the problem. Because obviously I'm not leading well, or I'm not talking to all of my students as well as I need to. So you need to self-evaluate, and if you are not, and again, I know that's a catchphrase type thing, but I love it. If you're not, it's one I really enjoy using, and that is, if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. You cannot just sit there and say, well, gee, I didn't do this intentionally, so, I'm really not at fault here. Yes, you are, because you have a problem within your system. And so fix the system. Do what you can to fix the system.
And that's the thing that we often see, because it's difficult to, they think it's difficult to approach it. But at the end of the day, if you point to and say, well, it's really the socioeconomics of it. Okay. So what do we know is a major contributing factor to your wealth class? It's how well you're educated. And I don't mean that you go to college, and I mean that you have the ability to problem solve, which, if you're a kid like one of the ones that's focused on in this article, who is asking your teachers to be given more challenging courses, and your teachers say no, then how are you ever going to grow? If you keep getting forced into classes where you just get by, you're not going to be challenged. And then you stay in your, financial bracket, and then your children, and it's the same, and it's this endless cycle, right? Then of the wheel keeps spinning because we never get out of it, because the ones who actually have the motivation to do something and to speak up, which doesn't mean the ones who don't speak up couldn't. It just means we're talking about the few that actually are willing to volunteer and say, hey, I want something more challenging. If they're not even being given the opportunity, then you run into, well, you have all these kids who maybe are smart enough and don't even realize it, and aren't going to ask for it, but if it was offered to them, would grow. And that's what I'm talking about with the cycle. If you're going to blame it on socioeconomics, you still got to do something about it, because education is a huge part of where you fall in that class.
But see, you can't blame it on that. See, I'm not arguing with you, but you can't have these pat blames that you can go to, because it's just as easy to say, well, this is the problem. This problem was established by the politicians who said all of a sudden we're going to start comparing, and this was probably 20 years ago, we're going to start comparing different school districts within our state by their graduation rate. So therefore, the emphasis for each school to prove that they deserve more state money is to graduate more people. Well, education is about teaching people. It's not about graduating or not graduating. It's about, like you said, problem solving skills, work skills, how to balance your budget, whatever. But it's about teaching young people is what education is about. But again, I'm not going to blame the politicians, because by all of a sudden making it about graduation rate, now all we've done is uncovered another problem within the system. Okay, now the graduation rates are up, but we're still not giving students the same education. Well, that's what we need to be doing, and so, on one hand, you could say, well, blame the politicians because they made it about graduation rates. So school lowered their standards for certain groups of young people so that they could have a higher graduation rate, so their school district could look good, so they could get more money, so they could do more for the students. But again, I don't want to blame the politicians, because I don't want to point blame on anybody. I don't want to point blame on socioeconomics. I don't want to point blame on politicians. You just have to say, this report shows that we are not educating the same group of students, that is freshmen, juniors, sophomores, 8th graders, 6th grade, whatever. That group, we're not educating them equally. So what do we do to fix that problem? And again, I'm not blaming anybody. I don't want to put blame on the teachers. I don't want to put blame on the administrators. I don't want to put blame on the kids. I don't want to put blame on their parents. Folks, we have a problem. How do we fix it? And I don't think you can argue that there's not a problem in Charlottesville. And if there's a problem in Charlottesville, there's probably a problem anywhere that there are different socioeconomic groups and racial groups going to school together. And so we need to fix that problem. And then maybe some of these other things will take care of themselves. So again, I'm not here today, and I think I'm making it clear, to appoint blame to anyone, but instead to make people aware that there is a problem, that we are not educating children equally in this country.
We have to accept that there's not a problem if you want to fix it. I don't know how many times I've said that. It's probably way too many now, but the first step in solving a problem is acknowledging that there is one. So if we can't even do that, we have no hope of making it better.
And that's why I don't want to get caught up in race or politics or anything else. Just admit there's a problem. And now as people in the education arena or the political arena or the arena of life, how do we solve it? Mm-hmm. Because we're talking about our future.
Yeah.
That's what is so big to me. We're not talking about a problem about people overseas or people coming into our country or the elderly or all of those things, which are also valid. But we're talking about the future of our country. Yeah. We're talking about the young people. And we obviously have a problem here, and we're not doing enough to fix it.
And with that, I think it's fitting that we talk about our mission statement now, because TrueChat's mission is literally to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations, which I think Lance and I are definitely trying to do today. I have no doubt that that fits our mission. But if you doubt it, we want to know that you doubt it. You can email ethics@truechat.org and let us know. But we want your thoughts on this question. I think what Lance was kind of getting at without saying it is this racism question is a loaded question, because you pretty much can't answer it in a way that doesn't upset somebody, because we do all have our own personal truth about like how we define that. And so it is a little complicated, but that's part of why I wanted us to talk about it. And we spent a lot of time on that. We've got two more to get through, two more questions that I think it is important, and then we're going to get into our solution here in the last few minutes. So keep us updated on what you think about my first question there. Is this racism? What does racism mean to you? Let us know at TrueChat.org, Facebook, Twitter, and pretty much all social media. So find us. Next thing, Lance, are the processes inherently unfair? And this one's tough. Without, fully examining all of their many processes, it's difficult to know if it's the processes or the people, but you've got to imagine that there's something wrong in both places for it to be as bad as it is.
Sure, they're unfair. And I mean, it's inherently unfair. And they also may be people may be doing things that enhance the unfairness. But of course they're unfair. If you're steering minority students away from what would be considered challenging classes for them, and that's the process, that's what you're being told to do so that you can get graduation rates up in your school. Yes, that's an inherent problem. I mean, that the system is saying, we don't want you to challenge yourself academically or even socially, because let's face it, I don't know what you said, something to like what percentage of the people, white students make up the honors classes, but you're going to be challenging yourself socially on both groups. If you challenge minority students to sit in the same classroom with white students, that challenges people socially, not just economically and not just educationally. And
white students make up more than 70% of the district's gifted students.
So just imagine that. You're going to walk in, if you're a minority student who wants to be challenged by taking these higher academic classes, you're going to be challenged by the social stigma of sitting there with white students. You're going to be challenged by their feelings towards you, and the white students are going to be challenged but the thing is, once you sit down and you start having class together, you realize you're all just students trying to learn something, and you can start to look past some of those other issues that you bring with you through your upbringing or through your neighborhood or whatever you brought into the school. You're like, nah, this isn't really true because I'm sitting in class with them, and, or maybe it is true. And we're both human beings. But yeah, we're brought up differently and we have different values and different morals, but we can still sit in here and have class together. So why can't we go shopping in the same store together? Why can't we sit on the same bus together? Why can't we work at the same company with one another? And you know what? We may not be friends because we don't necessarily see things in the world the same, but we can learn to live together and not dislike someone else just because they're different than us. So yes, I think there are inherent problems here because
with the system,
because you're not allowing students of color to challenge themselves if they want to. And again, why are you giving them the option? I would even go that far. Why aren't you automatically challenging them?
Well, and I think all of this goes along. It's about the graduation rate thing, because in 1984, only 11% of Charlottesville's white students qualified as gifted. 11% back in 1984. And that's according to federal data. By 2003, the same audit concluded that about a third of white students qualified. And then fast forward to today, white students make up more than 70% of the district's gifted students. And about a third of all the white students in the school qualify for the program. So you already have 33%. And then some may say, well, okay, but are white kids the biggest demographic? Because then maybe that in part accounts for it. Well, they make up about 40% of the student population, 33% approximately black, and then the remaining made up of, mixed or other racial categories. So yes, they're 7% larger, not even quite, because it's like 33.33%. So, 6.66%, larger. And yet they account for 70%.
Almost twice their numbers.
Right. Almost twice their numbers in the program. So that right there tells you that it's not as simple as, well, there's more of them. It's not. That just goes back to, we're trying to reinforce, hopefully, for people out there, that it is indeed a systematic problem that's occurring here. It's not accountable by saying, well, these data points suggest that it's just the way that it is. Yeah, it's that way, but it can be changed. And then the question that I wrote down, and I touched on this before, is it intentional? We can probably sum this one up real quick. Of course, it's impossible, not impossible, but it's hard to pin this down to a factual it is or it isn't, because depending on who you ask, similar to the is it racism thing, you're going to get a lot of different answers, from no, it's not intentional because nobody's that mean, to, white people have built-in racism to an extent because of how they've been growing up in the country. And so I think it's my assumption, based on what I'm reading,
and vice versa.
It's not mostly.
It's not just white people who have racist feelings and overtones. I mean, I know you don't feel that way.
Right.
I just want to make that clear. It's not just white people that.
No.
I mean, all people tend to have some racial biases and racial ideas. It's hard not to. But the only way you break down those thoughts and barriers are to bring people together. Mm-hmm. But anyway,
the stand in your own corners thing, not going to make it happen. So,
and that's not America.
No.
I mean, since the beginning of America, the reason we grew, you and I are reading a book about the economic history of the United States.
Capitalism.
The thing they point out in the introduction is America has always been about going out and getting the best workers in the world.
If you're the best, we want you.
Whether you were the best at making a factory, whether you were the best at chopping down a tree, whether you were the best at mining coal or whatever. We brought in people, the most successful colonies in the in the North American region of Great Britain brought in workers from other countries because they were the best at what they did. So anyway.
Well, I was just thinking, when you said that, the thing that came to mind for me was agriculture. We always talk about what our agriculture industry, how it's such a powerhouse on the world stage. But we forget that the basis of most of our agricultural techniques, didn't come from people that, quote unquote, look like us. It came from the people that were here before us that we pushed out of the way, that we, again, continue to do that to today. So it just plays into that. Not every time we've taken it has it been evil like that. I'm just pointing out that so much of what we have today that we look at, that we're proud of as Americans, were because we solicited diverse range of skills from diverse ranges of people. So it's, if you're the best at this thing, we want to learn how you do it, and maybe even do it better. But we got to learn first how it's done. So the is it intentional thing, my guess is that most of it's probably not consciously intentional on the degree of you're black, so therefore I don't want you to be in the gifted program. I'm sure there is some of that. I mean, I don't doubt that it's happening, but my guess is it's more of a subconscious. I don't keep my job if the graduation rate doesn't stay high, and the data tells me that the black students are less likely to graduate. So I may not personally have anything against them, but I want to keep my job. And then, so that's where it goes back to what Lance has said. It's a systematic problem of, you can't just expect the teachers to be able to change it all on their own, because if what their livelihood is dependent on makes them feel like they're trapped in this only option they have, then it's really hard to ask them to be the ones to do it by themselves. They have to have the ability to do it.
But here's the how
do we fix it?
Here's the
minute that we
that's
have
what
left.
I was going to say. I mean, I was trying to take that from you, but you said it directly. But here's the positive of this, because it is a systemic problem. Systemic problems can be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
That's the simple answer. I know
change the system.
It's not simple, but it is. Okay. You keep going on and on about how it's the system. Well, I agree with you. And so if it's a systemic problem, then all you have to do is change the system. You don't have to. Now, you may have to change the people, because there may be some people who don't agree with the system, or agree with the change that you want to make in the system. But for the most part, all you have to do is make changes within the system, and then you start to alleviate a lot of the problems.
Graduation rate, I think, is the best place to start.
All you have to do is, first though, like you said, you have to accept that there is a problem. And then you have to be willing to change to try to fix the problem. And your first attempt, like Thomas Edison, may not work.
Or your first 9,000 attempts.
Right. But you need to, okay, this is the problem. Uh-huh. We will stay at it until we find a way to fix it.
We keep trying. And the easy one to start with, because the data literally tells us the problem started getting worse as soon as the state moved to assessing schools funding based on their graduation rate. That's when it began. So maybe that's it, or maybe that's not, but that's a great place to begin looking at. That's got to be part of it, or it led to whatever the problem is. So that's where we can begin the conversation. We need your brains, though, out there to help us figure out what the solution is and make sure we've encompassed the whole problem. So let us know at TrueChat.org, Facebook, Twitter, social media everywhere. Let us know your thoughts. And you can find TrueChat podcasts like The State of Us pretty much anywhere that fine podcasts are found, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. Spotify. For the state of us, that's where Lance's friends listen. For those of you that don't know, Lance doesn't have friends. He does probably have friends that listen on Spotify.
Lance doesn't have friends. That's the joke, folks. That's the inner joke.
Yeah, that's the joke. So for the state of us joke. On TrueChat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on The State of Us. Be the change.